Well, thank you. Really excited to be here again this year. Who was here last year? Who was here in 2021? Who was here in 2020? And who was here in 2019? So it's great to be back and see everyone engaged after the pandemic, and really, really happy to be here, as I said. I'm Seth Dobrin. I'm the founder of Quantum AI, which is a Dubai-based technology consulting company. And our aim in Quantum AI is really to help bring new technologies and new capabilities to this market. We're a wholly owned foreign body, so I own Quantum outright. So there's no government agencies or government entity involved in this. And we are a mainland company, so we can sell directly in Dubai, which is rather unique for a foreigner to have this kind of license. I'm also an advisor for the Responsible AI Institute. And that's really what I want to talk to you today is about responsible AI. And what is this? I call it a story arc. I have an analogy in here for how can you implement and improve AI in a more responsible, fair, and inclusive manner. And so if you think about AI and where we are today, I think the EU put it best in their act. Really, AI should work for the people and be a force for good for society. And we think about trust. Trust is essential for human beings. As human beings, we live on trust. The only way to drive adoption of our applications, even if we're building DevOps, is through trust and transparency and responsibility. And it's a very inherent nature in humans that if we don't trust something, we're not going to use it. And if we don't understand it, we're not going to use it. So explainability and transparency are critical for responsible AI. When we think about our online and offline lives, again, trust is incredibly important part of this. And it's really important for us to be able to understand how an AI is doing something, why it's doing it, and what impact it's going to have on me. It gets back to the conversation they were just having about consent. The biggest part of building responsible AI is making sure that the consent is given for the data that's being used, for the application that the AI is going to be built in. And when you think about one of the forces of innovation behind responsible AI, or behind what's going on in the world today, it is AI. AI is an incredibly innovative technology. It's probably one of the most innovative technologies that we've seen in the last 100 years. It's transforming how we interact. It saved lives during the pandemic. All the vaccines that came out, all the drugs that are starting to come out now, had AI involved in their development. That's how they were developed so rapidly. Even the conversation that was just had about the supply chains during the pandemic. All of the supply chains that were broken in the pandemic, the ones that healed the fastest had AI capabilities that could reinvent how they were interacting with suppliers and with manufacturers. And ethical issues have been pervasive throughout the years with AI. There's been a lot of misuse of AI, a lot of good intended use of AI that turned out not to be so well intended, and they've really given us a bad name and a bad rap for how AI can truly impact the world. If you look at, despite this, Morningstar just released a report last year that showed 77% of organizations are currently exploring or using AI in their business. But if they're doing this at that pace, why is responsible AI such a challenge? And if you look at these stats up here, from PwC found that 57% of leaders plan to ensure that they're compliant with upcoming regulations. And 1% have no plans to address regulations at all. Actually, I'm really surprised it's only 57% because these regulations that are coming out have significant teeth in them if something goes wrong throughout the world. And when you look at a more recent report, that there are no key steps to ensure AI is trustworthy and responsible. We need to make sure that you reduce bias, that you perform model validation and model drift, and you need to make sure that your AI-powered decisions have explanations behind them. So if I'm getting a mortgage or I'm applying for a credit card, why did I not get that credit card if I didn't? And why did I if I did? Positive and negative explanations are both equally as important. And if you look at the organizations that are seeing the highest returns from AI, these organizations engage in risk mitigating processes more often than others. This has been found by McKinsey. This has also been found by Harvard Business Review and other journals that really look into this and understand how organizations are getting the most value from their AI. And as you look about leaders that are prioritizing AI, those that prioritize responsible AI, so the leaders, the AI leaders, those leaders tend to see significant business impact when they do over those who don't. So leaders that think of responsible AI first and foremost build better products. They have a better brand reputation, and they have higher level of innovation. This was found by MIT and BCG recently. And as we look to a new era of AI, and we start looking at AI being built into our systems, responsible AI innovations require that you have rigorous testing of your AI and your data, as Aishwarya said a few minutes ago. And that risk mitigation is really important part of it when we start looking at model bias and model accuracy. How do you mitigate bias? Not only how do you detect it, but how do you mitigate it? How do you prevent it from being pervasive and being propagated over and over again? An important part about this, too, is design. We often think about AI as a technical implementation, and it is, but it's a technical implementation to solve a business problem. And in business, when we're trying to solve a problem, it comes down to money. It comes down to how am I going to make the business or the organization money, or how am I going to save the organization money, or how am I going to make some human's life better, cheaper, or faster. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, AI, getting value from AI is about the humans that are involved. And good AI starts with design. And it starts with that human question. What problem am I trying to solve for a human? Who's going to be impacted? Who's going to be using it? Those may or may not be the same person, and that's an important piece to remember. When we think about the progression from the Stone Age to AI to Web 3.0, human innovations have historically caused disruptions in society, have often and frequently been challenged as is, are they the right thing to do? We're seeing that today with the implementation of AI. There's challenges about what's this mean for my job? There's challenges about how is this going to impact me? How are you using my data? Why are we making these decisions? Challenges around the balance of people's rights versus businesses' rights and businesses' needs. And we need to, again, place humans at the center of this conversation. And I think the answer to the question about consent comes down to, if you're a business and you want access to someone's data, you need to build a good value proposition. If you're going to use my data to do something, why should I give it to you? What's the value proposition that I'm getting? How am I going to get value from you getting value from me? Because ultimately, my data represents me. And your data represents you. So why would you give that up? And why would you let someone use that if there's nothing in it for you? And AI is just a tool. It's just a technology that's developed to add intelligence to computational tasks. That's really all it is. When you think about it, AI is just math and computer science that's focused on a business problem that's meant to provide value for a human being. That's ultimately what AI is. That's the focus of AI, and that's what the desired outcome should be. You have to think about design up front when you're doing this, and you have to think about the human that's involved. And it's also, the technology and design have been at odds at times. There's been lots of tools and individuals and groups that don't understand, and they push things into production without looking at the whole of the AI system. And the results when you don't put design and you don't put the human up front are suboptimal outcomes. If we want to talk about humans, and we want to talk about human and AI interaction, a great example is an artist. An artist, and it happens to be a friend of mine named Refik Anadol. Refik recently, about 2 years ago now, did a piece of work where he analyzed the metadata of the New York Museum of Modern Art. And what Refik presented from these were he was presenting works that combinations of artists that had things in common would have made had they been a single person. Now, I don't know about you, but this is a great example of how you can use AI. In this case, they're GANs, and they're generative neural networks, And they're generating art by looking at things. How does AI touch your soul? AI can touch your soul through art. And this really puts a human lens on it. He's now working on how does he explain how some of these things come to pass. And so how do you put the same kind of human touch that you see in artwork into the AI that happens in your business? Now, there are good things that happen with AI, such as the artwork that we see, and there's other examples of it. But AI can go bad oftentimes, too, and I referenced this earlier. There's examples where there's discrimination against people of different sexual orientations that are denied mortgages in the US because of what their backgrounds are. That's not acceptable in that part of the world, and in other parts of the world as well. And so how do we manage that bias? We can then look at discrimination in job applications. There's a well-known story about AWS, Amazon, when they were using AI to try and remove bias from the hiring process because they didn't understand their data well enough, as Aishwarya said a little bit ago, and they didn't understand that they were using the vastly male populations that had interviewed for them over the past to decide who was going to get selected. So of course, the AI only selected white males because that's what the data was pointing them towards. That's what the data said was the right people to hire. So we need to understand the specific biases in there. I think there's plenty of examples in bias in healthcare. And the interesting thing about healthcare is that bias in healthcare typically comes from a lack of data. A lack of data of specific populations with specific diseases who don't seek healthcare because of past discrimination or because of systematic discrimination that occurs in their society. And so bias in healthcare is actually a bias that's generated from a sparsity of data. And so understanding how do you represent those populations? How do you actively seek new populations to fill in the gaps of the data? Because if we don't have a lot of data about, say, African Americans with diabetes, you can't assume the data from them based on other demographics because they may not represent it. People of African descent have different reactions to older pathways, such as what's occurred in diabetes, evolutionarily older pathways. And so how do you account for that? It's hard to account for that with technology. You have to actually go seek populations. And AI is racist and sexist. Again, similar to the healthcare, there's structural things in our societies that lead to racism, that lead to the racist and sexist decisions. In the US, there's this process called redlining that used to occur. And honestly, it still does occur inadvertently because of AI, where historically there were different parts of the country based on zip code that were designated green, yellow, orange, and red. Green are the desirable populations, red are the undesirable populations. And so if you happen to live in in an area of the country, of the US, where it was designated as high undesirable population, you are unlikely to get a loan. Think about that. And if you did get a loan, it was going to be funded at a much lower level than it would have if you happened to be in a green zone. And so those decisions that have been made over a very long period of time in the US, and they did similar things in other parts of the world, are ingrained in the data that models are being built on. So those decisions, those past bad decisions that we as humans made, they're being propagated by the data. And there's, again, pervasive examples of racism and sexism. Think about the bots that happen that the various companies have put out there where they're trying to put a virtual agent out in the world to interact with us and learn and grow and develop and start having conversations. Inevitably, it gets racist. Inevitably, it gets hateful. Inevitably, it gets profane because that's the data it's built off of. Because we as humans are inclined to test things, and we've made bad decisions in the past. And I think, there's some studies out there from multiple papers, from multiple organizations that are really focusing on how do we solve this problem. And when we look at how we solve this problem, we need to remember a few things. One, the goal is to not get rid of all biases for every decision. The goal is to get rid of specific biases that negatively impact a specific decision for a human being. And so it starts with that human. You need to understand every use case. Back to what Aishwarya said earlier, you need domain experts that understand the use case, not just for bad data, but for what is relevant content what are relevant biases for that decision so you can identify them and mitigate them. Because most of the examples of bias in AI that occur today occur not because that was the intent. In fact, they occur usually after people went through great lengths to try and minimize the bias happening in the first place, but they weren't using technology to help address it and help mitigate it. As I said, I'm an advisor for the Responsible AI Institute. And the Responsible AI Institute has a heat map where you can go out and you can look and you can see all of the incidents that have occurred around the world of racist, biased, hateful AI. And you can keep track of it. There's other organizations out there that do that as well. And when we look at what's happening to address this, there's regulations are popping up all over the place. Even in the US, there's a regulation about this, which actually surprises the heck out of me, but makes me happy. I think regulation in this space is incredibly important. Even when I was at IBM, we were saying regulation is incredibly important. You don't hear technology companies or businesses saying regulation is important very often. As long as it is focused on an outcome and it is regulated around a specific outcome, it's a great thing. It actually drives innovation. If you understand the guardrails for which you can operate for facial recognition, for instance, you can build AI in that space, and you know what is inbounds and what is outbounds. If you're building a healthcare application and there's regulations around that guide that, you know what you can do to help protect people, because I can tell you no one in a healthcare wants to do harm to patients. They're in healthcare because they want to help people. Now, you know, the obvious commercial benefits of the technology are tremendous. And they still often fail to create value because people don't put responsibility in humans up front. And because if they want to truly empower humans, you have to think of the humans up front and not as an afterthought. Now, over the years, I've developed a formula for building responsible AI. I've been in this space in business for 10 years. My background, my PhD 25 years ago even is in AI. And so let's take a step back and look at an example. So Pixar is arguably the world's most innovative film house in the world. They've got 16 Academy Awards over a small number of years. Their films are incredibly engaging. And Pixar, maybe? We're stuck. Oh, there we go. So Pixar has a formula, right? What's their secret to success? It's a formula. And when you look at Pixar's formula, they have what's called the story arc. And their story arc goes something like this. Once upon a time, every day, one day, because of that, and because of that, until then. When we look at an example, let's take this in the real world. Once upon a time, there was a fish named Marlin and his son Nemo. Everyone knows the story. Marlin warns Nemo of the dangers that are out in the ocean. One day, like all adolescents, Nemo ignores his father. Because of that, Nemo ends up in a fish tank. And because Nemo ended up in a fish tank, Marlin sets off on a journey to find Nemo until finally he finds him and brings him home safely. So this formula, same type of formula, can help you design AI. And it goes something like this. You need to ensure explainable and interpretable AI systems. You need to measure the bias and fairness of AI systems. Notice I said systems and not models, because you could actually have no bias in any of your individual models, but most decisions worth solving are combinations of multiple models. You could actually have bias introduced during the combination of those models. And so you need to evaluate the whole system. You need to validate the systems of the operations of an AI system, the whole systematic operation. How does it interact with your software? How are the humans interacting with it? How is it being deployed and developed? You need to have things like observability. I'm not a big fan of the MLOps terminology, because MLOps is really a focused process. It's a task that you do. You need to observe the whole process, the whole system. You need to have business observability. Are you getting the desired business outcome? You need data observability, which Aishwarya talked about earlier. So you need to understand not just the data that's feeding into your model, but you guys are all, or maybe not, but this isn't a data scientist focused talk, but when you build a model, usually you have things that are called features. And these are combinations of different data elements that are engineered. You need to make sure those features perform at a rate that delivers the desired outcome. And then you need to look at model observability and, again, measure the desired business outcomes. You need to augment robustness, security, and safety of the AI. You need to deliver the accountability of AI systems, and you need to ensure that consumer protection is involved when it's appropriate. And over the course of the years, I've also noticed about 5 mistakes that every company makes in implementing AI when they first start out on this journey. I've personally transformed 2 Fortune 500 companies, and I've helped hundreds of the world's largest companies transform, and these are the mistakes that I've made and I've seen others make. First, there's no strategic plan. Second, the business value isn't really tied to the model. You have people that are building models but don't understand how it's going to make a company money or save them money or make a human's life better, cheaper, or faster. Design is an afterthought. So you build an AI model and someone comes in and says, hey, over here we need a designer. We need to figure out how we're going to interact with the human. It doesn't work. Trust is an afterthought. Oh, we built this model and now it's biased. I just built this foundational model called GPT-3, and it promotes biases. It promotes hate because they didn't think about trust up front. They didn't understand how they're going to manage that. You can't just go back and retrain GPT-3. You need to evaluate things like that at every iteration for trust and fairness so that you're not propagating it, because once it's built, it's built. And then there's no human-centric approach. Again, human is an afterthought. They don't think of the humans up front, so they can build outcomes that will provide a real tangible value to a human. When we think about how we implement this, so there's the processes, then there's how do we actually do it? How do we reduce to responsible AI in practice? First and foremost is education. People need to understand what you mean by responsible AI. You need to understand the maturity of an organization. You need to make sure that regulations have a consistent theme and there's a way to harmonize them. And you need to be able to audit. The only way that you know if your AI is responsible is to have an audit. Whether it's an internal audit or a third-party audit, you need some kind of audit of, again, your AI systems, not the individual models, so that you know that they're responsible. And who says they're responsible? Diversity and inclusion, I'm going to skip this a little bit because I'm running out of time. But I think there's 2 important pieces. AI can do one of 2 things, and I think you've probably gathered this from the talk. AI can either propagate and accelerate existing and past biases of humans, or it can be used to actually reduce the amount of bias and the amount of hate that's out there in the world when AI are driving some of these decisions. And so I encourage you, if you want to, become a member of RAY. With this link, it's free. Usually it's $100 to be an individual member. The Responsible AI Institute, the goal is to promote ways and methodologies in order to do these things I talked about, so please become a member. And happy to answer any questions.
Seth, thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for Seth, please? That was a real deep dive there. Thank you. So I would love to turn to the audience now and ask if we do have any questions. I actually have one for you to pick your brain a little bit. So we are at the Global DevSlam. We have people from all over the world that have come along. There was one really interesting slide you had on which was focusing on different regions and their work with regulations surrounding AI developments. I think it's a pain point and a sweet spot to get that perfect balance between innovation and also working with regulation. How would organizations overcome that? And also, is there any particular jurisdiction that's doing particularly well right now?
Well, I mean, the only place that actually has an AI regulation that exists today as a whole jurisdiction is Canada. So there is a Canadian AI Act. The EU Act is not out yet. I think, again, the important thing is to regulate the AI outcomes and not AI itself. Because think of a word processor. you could use a word processor to make all sorts of, you could use a word processor to write out the descriptions for building a bomb. Is that word processor responsible for the person who did that? No, you have to look at the outcome. You don't want people using your technology for that, but so you need to regulate the outcome, and that's a good thing.
Fantastic, thank you. Any more questions for Seth? Yes, we have one at the front.
Hi, so I have regularly taken part on solving someone's bias, basically because I found in a code saying that moms couldn't be single mothers. And that was literally just before I came. But I would like to ask you, how would you test this without the existence of having a female coming in place?
Yeah, so there are algorithms that test for biases, right? So there's a dozen or so algorithms that are out there that you can use that interrogate your models that will tell you if there are specific biases that exist. Now, you need to specify what the protected classes are. So you need to say so gender is a protected class. I'm not sure exactly how I would tackle words that are, when words are intentionally put in there. I'm not sure. That gets back to the design thing. But I think you need to algorithmically interrogate your models. There are organizations that are working on building data sets that are inherently biased so they can be used to test models for specific biases. That's the best way to do it. But again, it's for specific biases. You're never going to eliminate every bias. You need to tackle them one by one as they show up, and sometimes it takes a woman to show up and fix it, or a black or a brown person to show up and fix it before it gets fixed, unfortunately. Need less people that look like me and more people that look like you guys.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a final round of applause for Seth.